One of the reasons why God came into this world, because He wants people to know that God sees you. He wants people to know that the one who created you sees you, because so many of us grow up in a world where we are overlooked, where we think that no one sees us, and when they see us, all they see is a body. They don't see a person. They don't see someone who has had a journey of ups and downs. They don't see someone who has to carry with them a lot of pain, a lot of trauma, a lot of brokenness. And so I believe one of the reasons why Jesus came into this world is to communicate to us that God sees you. That is the most profound concept in my mind, because actually even studies show that one of the ways it helps us to regulate our emotions is to know that we are seen and we are heard. And so many of us live lives feeling like no one sees us. And so the gift, not just of us being able to see, but knowing that we are seen, is a beautiful thing. It's a powerful thing. And it's incorporated in today's sign. I grew up, obviously, in the 80s, and when I was about 8 or 9 years old, I started squinting, like doing that, and watching the TV doing that. And my parents are like, this guy's got to get his eyes checked, because my dad, has, he had very, very thick lenses. So his power was like minus 14 or minus 15. That's how, he literally could not see much, So they thought, okay, well, this guy also probably has that. And so from about 8 or 9, I was wearing these ginormous 80s style glasses. I mean, they're as big as your face. Now when I look back at those photos, I'm like, what kind of stupid fashion was this, they were so big. So I wore glasses till I was about 18, and I thought, now it's time to be cool. Now it's time to get contact lenses. And so ever since I was 18, I've been wearing contact lenses. Most people don't even know that, but the power of the regression of my eye is minus 5 on the left eye, minus 4.75 on the right eye. And so it means I see blur, right? Without contact lenses, I can't see much. It's just everything is a blur, So I've been wearing contact lenses for like a few decades now. But the gift of sight, I believe, is something we take for granted. And we take for granted that when we wake up in the morning, we can open our eyes and we can see. You know that 0.5% of the world, not even 1%, 0.5% of the world are blind. Right? It means they're either partially blind or completely blind. Now, out of 8.2 or 8.3 billion people in the world, that's 43 million. 43 million people in the world are blind, they cannot see. It's one of the disabilities or handicaps that are probably one of the worst, because your eyes actually help you connect with the world. Without your eyes, there is a sense of disconnection from the world. Without your eyes, you can't tell shapes, colors, size, pattern. You can only move about by feel or by hear or by touch. The gift of sight is such an incredible thing that I think most of us don't even recognize. Most of us overlook that gift. And so I feel for the 43 odd million people in the world who cannot see, because it means that they're actually less human in that sense. It means that they cannot experience this life the way God intended us to experience it. You know that 8% of what we do requires our eyes. In other words, it requires us the ability to see, because it involves our movements, it involves things that we do, it involves touch, it involves everything. And so just put yourself in the place of a blind man, just for a moment, and just picture what it means to not be able to see. And the sad thing is, friends, that so many of us who can see still remain disconnected from the world. So many of us who can see are still disconnected from people. And so, never mind the fact that those who are physically blind are disconnected from the world. so many of us who can see are still disconnected. So even though today's sign has to do with Jesus healing a blind man, it actually has to do with all of us. Because all of us, to some degree or the other, cannot see fully. All of us, to some degree or the other, are blind to certain things. All of us, to some degree or another, are disconnected from people and disconnected from ourselves, and to some degree disconnected from God as well. And so today is a famous incident of Jesus healing the blind man. It's found in John chapter 9, verse 1 onwards. And this is a very, very long text, so we're going to be skipping quite a few verses. But right from verse 1, it says this. It says, as Jesus was walking along, he saw a man who had been blind from birth. Rabbi, his disciples asked him, why was this man born blind? Was it because of his own sins or his parents' sins? You know, there are 33 recorded miracles that Jesus performed. 18 of them was upon request, but 15 of them was because of the compassion of Jesus. That someone did not necessarily even have to ask for a form of healing, but Jesus went to them. This tells me already that Jesus came to the world partly because he wanted us to be whole, right? And so they come across this blind man, and their question already reveals what's in their hearts, because the first thing they're thinking of was, is this man born blind because of his sin? Did he do something wrong? And we just read that this man was born blind. That means he had actually never seen. He doesn't know what people look like. He doesn't know what trees look like. He doesn't know what a sunset looks like. He doesn't know what water looks like. He doesn't know what anything looks like. He's been born from blind, and yet, because the Jews were surrounded by teachers of the law who were trying to enforce the law all the time, and who made up all kinds of laws in order to ensure that people kept the law, and because God had not sent a prophet for about 400 years, so they had not heard from God. And so when you don't hear from God, you try to be even more and more legalistic, building up more and more laws around you. And so the automatic thinking of the people of the day was, if someone suffers, it's because God is punishing them because of their sin. Right? In fact, it was a prevailing thought of the day is that if you are blind, it's God's punishment so that you cannot read and study the law. Because reading and studying the law was considered almost the pinnacle of what it meant to be a Jew. And therefore, if you're blind, it's because God is punishing you. I wonder how many of us live like that today. I wonder how many of us today think that if something wrong happens to me, it's because God is punishing me. Because perhaps you're carrying around a sense of guilt in your heart. I mean, this week alone I had conversations with people who are almost when things are going well for them, they're feeling like something bad is around the corner because God can't be this good. And I can't be this good. And so some kind of punishment is around the corner. I was so surprised that this kind of thinking even resides deep within my soul. You know, on Monday, my age was revealed a little bit because after we had put the kids to bed and I was walking down the passage, all of a sudden I'm like, oh, what's that? And I had this intense pain around the middle of my back, right? And I'm like, oh, and I can't walk, and I'm like dragging myself to the couch, and I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, what is this? It could be kidney stones, you know? But I'm like, it can't be kidney stones because it's quite high up, you know? So I'm thinking, what if it's a heart attack? And I'm like, but I have no other symptoms. Like I'm breathing normally, so it's not a heart attack. What is it? And it eventually turns out I had a back spasm, right across the middle of my back. And I was lying there, sitting there on the couch for ages, and I'd hoped that, you know, by the time I went to bed, by the time I woke up, it would be better. And it was a little bit better. But what fascinated me was, we're sitting there on the couch, and my mind is working like this, and I'm telling you, because I can't believe that I feel that I've done something wrong, so this has happened to me. Like literally, that's so my journey through shame, I think, has progressed quite a bit. But it seems like there's still a residue somewhere in my heart, because immediately my thought is, what have I done wrong? Like, what have I done wrong? You know, and that's the thought I'm thinking. And I think so many of us carry that inside of us, just like the disciples. Is because of this man's sin that he's blind? That somehow God is punishing you because of your sin? I mean, it would be so vindictive or even mean of God to punish us when he's already punished his own son on our behalf. I mean, just think about it. And so it's almost like double punishment. And so we often think, or at least I often think very much like the disciples, that somehow I've done something wrong and that's why this is happening to me. And in verse 3, Jesus says, it was not because of his sins or his parents' sins. Jesus answered, this happened so the power of God could be seen in him. Now, I don't want you to miss this, because some people, I feel, erroneously interpret this text to say that God caused this man to be blind. But I don't know if that's true necessarily, because that would mean that God is almost mean, he's almost sadistic, like, I'll purposely make your life hard so that I can display my glory through you. I don't think it's that. I think this man is just born into a fallen world. You know, some children are born into the world with certain kinds of defects or deformities. Right? And it's almost like Jesus saying, this has happened because I'm going to display my power through this. And I think that's how we should think about our lives, right? And when we fall into certain things that happen to us, when we go through certain kinds of suffering, maybe Jesus is whispering that into our souls. It's that I'm going to display my power and my glory through this. That is my desire. Are you willing to look at your circumstance through those lenses? Or are you going to adopt a woe is me attitude? Are you going to adopt a self-pity attitude? And then simply to verse 6, Jesus says, John says, then he spit on the ground, made mud with saliva, he spread the mud over the blind man's eyes, and then he told him, go wash yourself in the pool of Siloam. Siloam means sent. So the man went and washed and came back seeing. Now I wonder why Jesus did this, you know. It's a little bit awkward. I mean, Jesus could have just said, see, and he would have seen. But it literally does something quite bizarre. You know, he gathers some spit, you can imagine, like, and then he spits on the ground, and then he makes like putty, you know, he makes like dough paste, you know, and then he applies it on the man's eyes, and everyone is probably looking at this like, what is going on? And Jesus probably chuckling to himself, you know, just trying to make a spectacle of this in a way, you know, telling the man, go now wash your eyes and you'll be able to see. And I think maybe what Jesus is trying to do is he's reminding us of how he created Adam in the first place, right? Because he created Adam out of the dust of the ground. And so maybe he's subtly communicating, I'm going to recreate this man's eyes by also using the dust of the ground, right? And he had to make the ground a little bit wet, because if it was just dry, it would just be sand that just falls off the guy, you know. But he had to make a little bit of a paste, you know. So just go, you know, spit and make a paste on the man's eye, but to show that I'm the God who creates, and at the same time I'm the God who can recreate. But also it required faith from this man, right? Because if this man had no faith, he would not have gone and have to wash his eyes. Right? So it required a little bit of action. It required something that this man had to do. But here's the beauty of the miracle, friends. So, you know, we constantly have babies who are born in pulse. We're so grateful for that. But if you do this to a baby, as soon as a baby is born, if you put, say, a patch on one eye, and you leave that patch on for a few years, you take the patch off, the baby will not be able to see on that eye, the baby will be blind on that eye. You know why? Because sight has more to do than just your eyes. Sight has to do with your brain. Because the way God has created us is there is a connection between the eyes and the brain. Because actually, you don't see with your eyes. You actually see with your brain. Because your eyes is a mechanism for which light enters and then the brain forms the picture in your mind. And so what Jesus was doing here was an incredible miracle, because he wasn't just recreating the man's eyes, he was recreating the pathways from the eye to the brain so that this man could see. That's the power of what Jesus did. Absolute recreation. Recreating his eyes, recreating the pathway to the brain. This is the incredible nature of this miracle. And Jesus does that for this man out of compassion. And a lot happens in between that and the next few verses. But if you skip to verse 16, this is the reaction of the Pharisees. Some of the Pharisees said, "This man, Jesus, is not from God, for he's working on the Sabbath." And others say, "But how can an extraordinary sinner do such miraculous signs?" So there was a deep division amongst them. And this is what happens when you live under the law for so long, when you live under the yoke and the burden of the law, when you live as if you have to perform for God. Because they can't be happy for this guy, they can't be excited for him. The first thing they're going is, no, this man must be a sinner because he is doing something good on the Sabbath. Because they've recreated a whole bunch of laws regarding the Sabbath. I mean, it still exists today. Today they're not even allowed to push a button in an elevator because that constitutes work, right? And so this is what happens when you live in legalism for so long. And so today I want to spend the rest of the message just touching on that, because it wasn't just this blind man who could not see, but we can see the disciples suffering from legalism. We can see the Pharisees suffering from legalism. And so I just want to touch on that, because it is actually that keeps us from seeing. So the first thing I want to say about legalism is legalism keeps us from seeing Jesus. You see, it prevented these guys from seeing Jesus for who he was. And this is what happens when you choose to live under the law. And Jesus in Matthew 5:17 says, "Don't mistake me. I've not come to abolish the law that you guys hold in such high regard. I've come to accomplish it. I've come to achieve it." In other words, in me, the law is accomplished. So what Jesus is saying is that now I'm changing things. So now you no longer follow a written code. You now follow a person. That's the difference, friends. So what Jesus is trying to say is that we now follow a person. We do not follow a written code. And I think so many of us, we live by written codes. Written codes that we might not have written down on pieces of paper, but it's written on your heart. Is that you have these codes that you write by which you live your life and by which you expect other people to live by too. And only you know those written codes. But those actually prevent us from seeing Jesus. And here's the thing, right? It's safe to live by written codes. That's why we come up with written codes. That's why we're legalistic, because when we come up with written codes, when we live by them, it's safe. But it's actually a little bit dangerous to actually follow Jesus. It's more dangerous to follow Jesus than it is to live by written codes. So we stick with written codes because it's safe. If only I stuck to these codes, I will be safe. But Jesus is wanting to pull us out of that bubble. Because when you follow him, it's actually not the safest place in the world. It's actually the most dangerous place in the world, because now you open your life up to an adventure. Now you open your life up to being hurt by people. Because you're now not just doing religion, right? You're now just not attending church for the sake of attending church. Now you actually have to open your heart up to people, and in other words, you have to be vulnerable. But the problem with legalism is that you can't see Jesus because you're not seeing the heart of Jesus for people. And this is what these guys were suffering with. And therefore they could not see the Messiah. And I think so many of us struggle with legalism to some degree or the other. So what is preventing you from seeing Jesus today, friends? Perhaps you build up certain lenses through which you see life, you see reality, you see the world. Perhaps you have certain perspectives as you've adopted in your life as a coping mechanism to your pain, which I believe what legalism is, by the way. It's just another coping mechanism for the insecurities that you feel, for the inadequacies that you feel. Perhaps you've adopted these things that actually prevent you from seeing Jesus. These guys could not see the Messiah because their God was actually the law. Because their God was the law, and so they would not only just follow the law to the letter of the T, to the absolute hilt, but they would even create more and more laws, and in doing so, adding a burden on the people. Man, I just want to tell you that if following Jesus is a burden, then we're actually not seeing Jesus. Or we're not seeing the real Jesus. If following Jesus is a burden, we're not seeing the real Jesus. And so perhaps we need a hard examination, you know. Perhaps we feel like, oh Jesus, you're asking too much of me, man. Like what? You want me to hang out with you every day? Oh no, like I don't have time for that. You know, what? Once a week you want me to worship with your people? No, that's just too much. What? Once a week you want me to gather in community and first, no, that's too much. If it feels like a burden to you, you're not seeing Jesus. Because Jesus actually came to lift the burden of legalism from you. And perhaps your perspective is wrong. Perhaps you've been too legalistic about some things in your life. Legalism prevents you from seeing Jesus. But also, more tragically for me, actually, legalism prevents us from seeing people. These guys did not even for one moment think that this man was blind from birth. That God did something for him out of compassion. And for the rest of his life on earth, his life will be changed dramatically. Because now he can see. They don't see that. They don't celebrate that. They don't rejoice that. Instead, they're reverting back to the law. Oh, you're not supposed to do any good things on the Sabbath. You see, legalism prevents us from seeing human beings. In May, we were blessed with a voucher to go away in Salvi, so our family went there. And one of those days we decided, okay, let's go to God's window, because it's one of the most spectacular views in South Africa. And so it was about a 80 kilometer drive. And so it was kind of new territory. I've been to Salvi once or twice before, you know, but you don't know the area much. And so I remember there was a turn as on the highway, or sort of, you know, not highway, but sort of one of those roads that's 80 kilometers per hour maximum. So you had to slow down and turn right to go towards Salvi. So I slowed down and I turned right. But literally, as you turn right, there's a stop sign right in front of you. It's like, you don't see that stop sign. It's almost like they put it there just to trap you, right? And so I didn't see the stop sign. So I went past the stop sign, and then just a few meters ahead was a traffic cop, like waving you down. I was like, oh, you know, like I generally at least slow down to almost a halt at the stop sign, but this time I didn't, because like I genuinely did not see it, you know, because somehow I feel like it's strategically placed there, you know. Anyway, yeah. So the officer flags me down, and you know, you try to be good. You say, "Good morning, how are you, officers?" Officer's very grumpy. She's super grumpy. I don't know what's up with her. You know, she just won't look me in the eye. You know, and she just says, "Come." And so I have to cross the road and give her my details. And she's filling down the form and trying to have conversations. How's your day? Have you had a busy day? Nothing. She's not getting any response. And so she writes the ticket, you know, and eventually, like, I'm talking to her and saying, "Ma'am, I just want to say something." I said, "I'm not upset because I've got a fine, you know, like if I broke the law, I'm happy to pay the fine, right?" So I said, "Ma'am, I'm not upset about that." I said, "Ma'am, I'm upset because you didn't treat me like a human being." I said, "I'm upset because you treat me like a piece of meat." I said, "I'm upset because all you just see is a car and a body and a person that has broken the law, and so you must just write me a fine and send me away." And I said, you're just not seeing me as a human being. And she said, "That's not my job." She said, "My job is just to write traffic fines." But you know, so I could see that I was getting nowhere in the conversation, you know, because I was trying to somehow get through her heart, you know, that even though people break the law, the people inside those cars are actually human beings. And so you should treat them as one, you know. So I found that I was not getting anywhere. So my flesh was like, raging within me. I was like, man, I should say something back. And just like, just jab her a bit. But like, those moments like, no, you gotta be like a Christian, gotta be like a Christian. So I just said, good day, man, have a great day. And I kind of drove off, and I saw she pulled out a piece of, she was eating an apple. So I thought maybe I should be nice to her and buy her a bag of apples. Maybe that will change her heart, But the thing is, it isn't just this woman who's like this. So many of us are like that. You're so fixed on the law. You broke the law, you broke the law, you broke the law, but she missed the human being in front of her. And this is what happens when we're legalistic. Right? We miss seeing people. We just see bodies, we don't see people. We don't see a person with a story and a background and the pain and the hurt and the trauma that a person might go through. That's what's happening with these guys. Legalism keeps us from seeing people, because I really believe that Jesus came to restore the dignity and value and worth of every human being. That's one of the things Jesus came to do. He came to show us that God sees us and He hears us, and He's come to rescue us. Jesus restored this man's dignity, and that should be part of our mission and our mandate as Christians, right? To restore the value and the worth and the dignity in other human beings that we see around us. Because unfortunately, legalism is just a coping mechanism. So when you grow up with so much pain and trauma, you actually harden your heart by building up codes of behaviors, codes of conduct by which you live by and by which you expect other people to live by. And when they don't live by that way, when they don't behave the way you want them to behave, when they don't even think the way you want them to think, you stop seeing the people. And this for me is just so sad. This for me is one thing that saddens me about the Christian world, is that we fight with one another because we have different theological viewpoints. That somehow just because we've arrived at a certain way of looking at life and at the Bible and certain things, we argue and fight and even deride and demean other Christians who've arrived at other frameworks and other lenses through which they see life and the Bible. Once again, legalism, friends, dangerous, dangerous, dangerous. It keeps us from seeing people. It keeps us from loving one another well. And then verse 34, because after all of this, they carry on interrogating the man, and they can't believe the man, they can't believe that Jesus is the Messiah. And they say such a horrible thing in verse 34. This is what they say. They say, "You were born a total sinner," they answered. "Are you trying to teach us?" And they threw him out of the synagogue. Despite what the man is saying, they refuse to believe. This is such toxic thinking, friends. Here's the other thing I want to say is when you primarily only see people as sinners, you'll never be able to love them well. You'll never be able to do good to them. And I find myself often saying this, even in counseling sessions: stop seeing yourself as a sinner. Just stop seeing people primarily as sinners. And I'll land this plane just in a moment, because this is the change that God has done in my heart. Because if you continually see yourself and others like that, can you imagine what your psyche will become? That you will be a legalist. That you will constantly see the worst in people. That you will constantly see the worst in yourself. I mean, can you imagine these guys? They're not even seeing a person. They're saying, "You're a sinner, get out of here. Get out of the synagogue." I think sometimes we are like that in our own lives. When we continually identify ourselves as sinners, we become so harsh on people, we don't even want them in our presence. Just get out of my presence, you're a sinner. I don't want to be with you. That's because we only live surface level lives. We're not willing to dig deep, right? We're not even willing to dig past the legalism and go to what really is the heart of the matter. What really is causing me to be like this? The legalism prevents us from seeing ourselves. That's the bottom line. See, it doesn't just keep us from seeing Jesus, it doesn't just keep us from seeing others, it actually prevents us from seeing the pain and the trauma and the brokenness that's actually caused us to be in a certain way and to have certain lenses through which we view the world and through which we view people, through which we view ourselves. Fortunately, this man was able to speak to Jesus again, and he carries on his conversation with Jesus. And Jesus then says to him in verse 39, he says, I entered this world to render judgment, and this is the judgment, right? Not a judgment to condemn people to hell, but a judgment to give sight to the blind and to show those who think they see that they are blind. To give sight to the blind and to show those who think that they see that they are actually blind. And so my question as we end today is, are you one of those people who thinks you can see? Are you one of those people who thinks you can see clearly, that you don't need to learn about other people, that you don't need to grow as a human being, because you can just see so clearly? And that was one of the prayers that we were praying this morning, is that we'd be able to see like God, that we'd be able to see into people's hearts. That was one of the prayers this morning. You know, and as this person was praying, they were praying from that text, you know, when Samuel was choosing a king, and he looked at all of Jesse's sons, and in man's eyes, these guys look perfect to be the king, the next king of Israel, and yet in God's eyes, he said to Samuel, man looks at the outward appearance, but God sees the heart, right? And so I'm wondering if we're one of those people who thinks we actually see, but we don't see. Because when we think we actually see, what we do is we pre-render judgment of people. Oh, they look that way, or they behave that way, therefore they must be that. I can tell you, friends, that's not very loving. When we pre-render judgment on people based on their race, based on the color of their skin, based on their background, based on what family they come from, based on their addictions, based on their brokenness, we've already made a judgment call, and we're saying, I can actually see. And maybe Jesus is saying to us, maybe hold your horses for a moment, because I've come to show those who think they can see that they actually cannot see, that they are blind. So for a large part of my life, because of my own brokenness, I only used to see the world through the lens of right and wrong. You know, so I have a list of these are the right things to do, these are the right things to behave by, these are the wrong things to do, these are the wrong things to behave by. But that's just a legalistic frame, right? And it's only been in the last sort of year and a half that God's been really changing my heart in this regard. And so this is what's helped me, and I'll put it up on the screen as well as the last thing. That there's a difference between the right and the wrong lens and a beauty and tragedy lens. So when I started shifting my lenses from seeing the world through the lens of either beauty or tragedy, I found that, strangely enough, it's cultivated in me a heart for people. Right? Because then, when you see people, when you come across people, when you get to know people, you're actually seeing the beauty in them. You're seeing the God image in them. You're seeing them created in the image of God, instead of just seeing surface level things. Instead of just seeing culture or race or backgrounds or qualifications, whatever, you're seeing the image of God. You're seeing beauty in them. But the beauty about the tragedy lens as well is when something goes wrong, when they do something they're not supposed to do, when they fall into sin, for example, or something happens, instead of pointing the finger of judgment, you actually see it as tragic. You see it as something that breaks your heart. You see it as something that you can maybe perhaps enter into that situation and help. You see it as something where you can actually come alongside someone. I mean, I was having coffee with someone this week, and they were saying, you know, like when someone acts in an unsavory way, instead of being offended by them, we should actually put our arms around them and recognize that behind those actions is trauma and pain and past hurts and brokenness. You see, I found that adopting the beauty and tragedy lens in my life has actually begun to slowly cultivate the heart of Jesus in me, because I believe that's his heart for the world. And that's why he came, friends. That's why he came, because in God's heart, in God's mind, it's tragic that the world is in a place that it is today. In God's mind, it breaks his heart to see man walking away from him. And so he comes and he has compassion on people. And so even as I close today, do you still struggle with legalism, friends? Are you one of those people who only sees the world through a lens of right and wrong? Are you one of those people who struggles with intimacy with Jesus because you think he sees you through the lens of right and wrong? And therefore you struggle to even come near to him, or you think that when you've done something wrong, you need to withdraw because he doesn't want to do anything with you. But Jesus comes with the love of God. Jesus comes with the grace of God. And he says, here, just come to me. Because of what I did for you on the cross, I'm accepting you just as you are. I'm not punishing you. You know, and it actually breaks my heart, because as soon as something happens to us, we think God is punishing us. Right? We think that he's making us pay back for what we have done. And all Jesus' heart for us is for us to be healed, to be restored, to be made whole again, so that we can really experience the life that he has for us. Man, I don't know about you, but I want to see Jesus more and more. I want to see people. Like, when I'm with people, I actually want to see you as a person. I want to see your heart. I want to see your story. I want to see your journey. I want to know what makes you you. And more importantly, I want to see myself. I don't want to be blind to who I am, because I've just created these long lists of right and wrong. So that's you today. There's always a new day with Jesus. Like, his mercies are new every single morning. And so, I don't know about you, but I want to destroy the legalism inside of me. I want to destroy it, because it has kept me from intimacy with Jesus. It has kept me from loving people well. It's kept me from even seeing my own brokenness. And what has helped me is to change that lens from right and wrong to beauty and tragedy. And so that's my takeaway point for you today. Perhaps you can try it out. Perhaps put on these new lenses every day to see the world through the lens of beauty and tragedy. Because then on the one hand, you will rejoice and you'll be happy, be grateful for the beauty. And then on the other hand, you will have compassion for the tragedy, and you will want to do something about it and help, as opposed to pointing a finger of judgment and condemnation. Let me pray for us.